We're gonna talk about comics from Devil's Due. It's something you wondered if Talking Joe would ever do. I guess we'll explain it all to you. Gonna take some time to read the books we've never read.
Hey, hey, hey! It's a devil in disguise. It's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the best, in my opinion, and longest running dedicated GI Joe comics podcast. If you are new to the show, you can find out all the details about this podcast over at the website, which is talkingjoe.co.uk. The agenda for today is to continue our look at the Brandon Jerwa era of GI Joe Disavowed, with today Master and Apprentice Series 1, issues 1 to 4, that's the whole series, which came out from Devil's Due May to August 2004. And just for context, this was coming out at the same time as issues 30 to 34 of the Players and Pawns arc. Now, without further ado, let me introduce my co-host on this adventure. It is a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners. My young apprentice.
Yes, I missed an opportunity there to introduce you as would I say the master? Would I say the apprentice? Ooh.
I thought you were going to say, and I'm not doing this alone. It's the apprentice to my master. It's the Kamakura to my snake eyes. It's a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Thanks, Tim.
That's what I thought would happen.
I should have done that. The audience will never know now. Before we get right into Master and Apprentice, there was a tiny bit of previous business that I wanted to discuss. I just got in the post from a friend of the show, Josh Eggerbean, the After Action Report Volume 2, which is all about the Devil's Due era. It's it's a great little tome here.
Tell us about the cover.
Well, I did a deep dive with Josh on another episode as we trailed it. But yeah, it's got a full colour cover, brand new art by Devil's Due head honcho Josh Blaylock. So nice action-filled cover with some of the key touchstones of the Devil's Due era, including Zanya, Kamakura, Shipwreck in the Devil's Due era outfit. It's an attractive cover. And it's got an exclusive bit of art on the back there from Tim Seeley as well, marking the funeral of Lady J.
And this will go on your shelf next to Volume 1 of After Action Report, which has the Rod Wiggum cover and covers the Marvel years of G.I. Joe comics.
Indeed. And we'll be joined by Volume 3 when that is out.
Right.
We'll cover the Larry Hama IDW era. 5.5 through to 300 and more. Have you got this volume, Tim, or not yet?
I forgot to back it, and I said this to Josh at Assembly Required. I said I should come over and buy one, and he said, well, I only brought a few, and I was going to maybe sell these or hand these over to people who had backed it. And I said, oh, well, I don't want to take one that you might need for this weekend. And he said, also, you don't have to buy one. You can just take one because you contributed to Volume 1.
Right.
Well, so I thought that was nice. So then I forgot to go get my copy of Volume 2. So when Volume 3, when that campaign goes up, I'll say something to Josh.
It's and for benefit of Tim and the readers, if you want your copy earlier than that, you can also just buy it direct from the After Action Report. Google G.I. Joe After Action Report, and you'll take you to their website, and they've got a store where you can buy Volume 1 and Volume 2. And what I discovered reading this volume is that there was a little nugget that we missed talking about from the Brandon Jerwa run of the main comics, which was that in the Devil's Due trade paperback number 8, the Rise of the Red Shadows trade paperback, they included a 5-page section which was titled Rest Well Soldier, and it was a little, I guess, vignette from Lady J's funeral, sort of with Flint sort of thinking back to some of their memories.
Oh, that's great. Is it who's it written by? Who's it drawn by?
Let me see. Does it say?
So you're saying this is new material that was not in the issues that was added for the paperback collection.
Exactly. Yes. So it looks like it's small print. It looks like this bonus story was written by the guy who normally edits, Mike O'Sullivan, with pencils by Nelson Blake II.
That's cool. I wish I had a copy of that for when we did that story in an episode of Talking Joe. I wonder if that's included in the IDW Disavowed.
Yes, I believe they included it in the IDW reprint.
Okay, yeah. That's cool. So then there's sort of a second chance to get it because anecdotally and also from Josh Blaylock when we interviewed him, I believe and we know that the Devil's Due trade paperbacks, those skinny ones that were all 4 or 5 or 6 issues, did not have high print runs. Mm-hmm. So as a reader who's doing the Devil's Due run in good faith, I don't want to miss anything since it's so small, or so short, I should say. And it wasn't in the original issues. I forgive myself for missing it. And apologies to any mega fans who have that collection, who when we did the episode, noted that we didn't cover that. I guess isn't an epilogue?
Yeah, I guess it's like a bookend.
And later, on an episode of Talking Joe, we will definitely talk about a 5-page story that was added to a future Devil's Due collection of a Devil's Due story, which I'll just leave as that tease.
And I know you well enough to know exactly what you're talking about, Tim.
Also, GI Joe fans probably know what I'm talking about. Master and Apprentice. Mark, did you read this when it was originally published?
Yeah, I would have done. Yeah, I was getting all of these and reading them as they were coming out. So yeah, I would have done. As
with the Devil's Due issues from then, do you not have a distinct memory of reading it, or do you?
Yeah, very hazy memories. If before, prior to my reread, if you were to pressure me on what exactly was in that issue, I would not have been able to tell you beyond knowing that it was about Snake Eyes and Kamakura, and it was a bit of an origin story for Kamakura. But beyond that, I wouldn't have been able to tell you.
I did not read it at the time, and I was intrigued momentarily because this was going to be something separate from the main Devil's Due continuity. So to remind our listeners who know this well, I stayed for the first 10 or so issues of the Devil's Due run. I dropped the book. I came back for issue 21 because that was really exciting. And because this was going to be separate, briefly I considered reading it, but then I realized that it was the guy who was writing the main book. And even if it wasn't the main story, it had a character from the main story who I didn't care for, Kamakura. And if it was going to be ninja focused and sort of separate from the main story, I wasn't optimistic that I would get anything out of the story for it not being written by Larry Hama. So I didn't read it at the time, but I think I did note that the art in it was more exciting than most of the art in all of the Devil's Due issues up until that point. And I think I slightly filed away the artist's name, Stefano Caselli, for when he A, did the second Master and Apprentice miniseries, and B, when he showed up to draw the main book, GI Joe America's Elite. Anecdotally, I bumped into an issue from one of these 2 miniseries. I think it was an issue from, I don't remember if it was Master and Apprentice 1 or 2, but 2 years ago I was making some sort of grab bags for Halloween to give away to neighborhood kids instead of candy. And I had this one random issue of Master and Apprentice, I think from a weird eBay buy. And I read it and I thought, I can't tell what's going on in this. And it was not in issue 1. It wasn't Master Apprentice 1. It wasn't Master Apprentice Volume 2, number 1. So maybe the creative team can be forgiven. But I might come back to that thread as we talk about these 4 issues. I do want to say now I am a fan of Stefano Caselli, both for the work he did on America's Elite and then also when he pretty quickly got snapped up by Marvel to draw Amazing Spider-Man and was it Avengers the Initiative? And why just this morning I read the new issue of X-Men Red, which he drew 2/3 of, and he's been the main artist on this series.
Oh wow. Yeah, I was just going to hover over Stefano Caselli there because at the time that he drew this, he was relatively new into his career. It looked like sort of most of the work that he began sort of doing in the more of the mainstream was at Devil's Due in this sort of period, 2003, 2004, that he'd worked on Micronauts, Hack Slash with Tim Seeley, and he did the first issue on that. So I think he's credited as the co-creator of Hack Slash. He did a series called Defects, and then I think the main body of work was this Master and Apprentice, the GI Joe America's Elite ongoing issues 0 to 8, and then sort of getting snapped up by Marvel, Civil War, Young Avengers, and Runaways. Then a long run on the Avengers of the Initiative, and sort of spreading his wings further into the likes of, I guess, one of the premiere books, Amazing Spider-Man included. And I thought as well that there's some parallels there to the career path of Nitho Diaz, of sort of coming onto the G.I. Joe book with quite a bold, dynamic style, which was a little different to the kind of the established style of the book. You know, doing his thing in the G.I. Joe world for a bit and then getting snapped up by Marvel. And of course, Nitho has been doing some Marvel books in recent months, likes of Thunderbolts and so on.
Yeah, these two creators who are not in America, work for smaller American companies and then work for bigger American companies, is also a trend in American comics. There are a lot of creators who Marvel and DC and Dark Horse and Image snap up from, in the case of Marvel and DC, snap up from Dark Horse and IDW or Zenescope or Boom. And in the case of sort of that second tier of publisher under Marvel and DC, they're snapping up from the third and fourth tier of publisher. And this is actually sort of the end of the cycle. If you've ever seen an interview with an editor or gone to a panel at a convention where an artist says, or I guess a writer says, how do I break into comics? And they say, publish your own work or get published by a small publisher, because it's much more believable to an editor when you walk up to them at a convention and you show them some comics that you have drawn for a publisher, even if it's not a great publisher or not a book that anyone's heard of or not a character that you want to stick with forever. But it's one thing to have sample pages, which look good. It's another thing to show a printed comic, which shows that you were, trustworthy enough to finish a job. And then, the editor at the larger or the much larger publisher then, has more faith in your ability to deliver. All right. So Master and Apprentice.
Creative team.
Yeah.
So the creative team are story, Brandon Jerwa.
Brandon Jerwa.
Artwork, Stefano Caselli and Sunder. I assume that the split of that is Stefano is pencils and inks, or potentially just pencils, and Sunder being colours.
I strongly believe that is pencils and colours.
The unsaid thing there being no inks, probably.
Yeah, you can, if you look up close at a lot of the lines in this story, you can see they're like slightly scratchy or like slightly not pure black. They're like dark gray. Please continue.
Lettering, Dreamer Design, editor Mark Powers, graphic design Mike Norton, military consultation Andrew Swenson, and covers largely by Stefano Caselli.
There is an additional editor on issue 1. That's Marshall Dillon. Issue 1, the editor is Marshall Dillon with Mark Powers.
I don't recognize that name.
I don't either. Isn't this also when in one of the Devil's Due news pages in the back, isn't this when they announced that Mark Powers, who had been in X-Men? Yes.
Right.
Yes. Okay. So in the back of issue 2 on the Devil's Due news page, former Marvel editor joins Devil's Due. And then, because this is a joke, adds the letter X to all titles. So former X-Men editor Mark Powers takes on the role of DD's senior editor. So the joke is that, it's going to be like X GI Joe and X Voltron and X Street Fighter, I guess.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
Okay, so we've got a fair few covers to get through. So maybe let's not delve into the detail of every single one of them. But what would you like to highlight about these covers, Tim?
Yes. So no variant covers, right?
There are a few, I believe.
Oh.
I can even flick to my book.
Oh, right. Let me let me go to this website where I look up all my covers.
So yeah, I think the variants aren't particularly exciting, but
okay. Yeah. All right. So in broad strokes, I'm going to talk about.
And there's also an exclusive trade paperback cover as well, which
right,
I think
you talk
reuses
about
an image.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll briefly talk about 1, 2, 3, 4. One had a pencils only variant, and that was a second printing. And one had a third printing, which was just the Irachikage symbol with no other artwork on it. Okay. So these 4 covers are fun because they all share 2 or 3 motifs. They all have the Irachikage logo in the background, the alternating broken and solid red lines. They all have head and shoulder or sort of head, eyes, close-up depictions of the 2 or 3 major characters in this miniseries, the Master and the Apprentice, and then a bad guy. And they all have a sword motif. So on the issue 1 cover, Snake Eyes and Kamakura are holding their swords, and their swords become sort of one item due to the compositional overlap of them. And on the second cover, similarly, their swords become sort of one sword. And then on the third cover, it's photos of them on a table, and there's a sword stuck into the table. And then on the fourth one, it's close-ups of swords. And this is where you can really tell that Caselli is penciling only. If you look at, I guess it's Storm Shadow's eyebrow or some of the details right above Snake Eyes' visor. But on the cover to 4, you see 3 sword tips that are overlapping, and in the reflections of them, you see these close-ups of Kamakura's eyes and Snake Eyes' visor and Storm Shadow. The other thing that jumps out about these 4 covers, because of the red symbol that is in the background of each of them, and because they sort of continually show Snake Eyes and Kamakura and Snake Eyes and Kamakura, if you put these covers next to each other and you squint, they all look more similar than dissimilar. And I'm not saying that you would mix up one for another, but they do feel of a piece, and that's something that I like. I do think in general, in a monthly series, you should make one cover look distinct from the next cover, particularly if at a comic book store, those 2 comics are going to sit next to each other. Sometimes you have an issue of Batman next to last month's issue of Batman, and, both of them are like nighttime Batman, like swinging or up on a rooftop with a lot of black ink, and they might be different drawings, but they're pretty similar. And then you look at any 2 issues of Saga, the monthly series from Image, and they always have a very bold, different, distinct background color, different from the previous month. So I like how these 4 Master and Apprentice covers feel related. The other thing that jumps out at me is the font treatment of the subtitle, Master and Apprentice. The actual letter forms, they are stylized to resemble Japanese letter forms. Mm-hmm. And I think they are very, very, very slightly hard to read, these two words, Master and Apprentice. I think having the giant ampersand somewhat come before the word master slightly confuses it.
Mhm.
But I appreciate that in sort of every way, these four covers look different from the run of covers that was happening at the same time in the main G.I. Joe book, and that these announce themselves as a separate thing, as a miniseries.
Very good. Yeah, there were a couple of variant covers, mostly which sort of repurposed interior art. So the Master and Apprentice trade paperback has got a cover sort of with a figure of Kamakura and Snake Eyes sort of split down the middle, which was a double-page splash from issue 4. And issue 4 has a cover B second printing, which is the full-page splash of Kamakura, which is how the sort of the book wraps up. And then there's a cover 1 variant, which I think is an image which is used on as a back cover or trailing the next issue elsewhere. So sort of, yeah, not missing out too much if you don't have those variants, because the images are elsewhere within the book. Shall I do a plot breakdown?
Yes.
There's a lot that happens, Tim, so this was quite tricky. It might be longer than a typical plot breakdown, but here we go. I thought about going super short and just doing a sentence, and then I thought, no, that's too short.
I'm ready for a long one. Go for it.
Okay, that's what she said. Okay, right. Plot breakdown. In the period that the G.I. Joe team is disbanded, Snake Eyes is training a new apprentice named Ophelia. Snake Eyes and Ophelia go on a final ninja training test, a mission to capture Firefly. In parallel, Duke and Chuckles are working with Sean Collins's Hammer team on the same objective. This mission meets with tragic consequences. Firefly kills Ophelia, and all of the Hammer team except Sean Collins die in an explosion. Snake Eyes misses his wedding to Scarlet and takes Sean Collins as his new apprentice. After some time of training, Sean is about to face his final trial. Jinx, Budo, Snake Eyes, and Sean attempt to capture Firefly when Storm Shadow makes an unexpected appearance. After a tussle, it is revealed that Duke and Chuckles have been working with Storm Shadow to catch Firefly, as well as the mysterious figure known as Nowhere Man. Nowhere Man is revealed to be Sean's old Hammer team leader, Mikhail Derenko, who was supposed to have died on that previous ill-fated mission. Wade Collins, Sean's father, is recruited by Nowhere Man so that he can use his Crimson Guard Fred series face to unlock facial recognition in a secret vault. He has the misguided notion that he is helping Sean, but he dies in the process. Sean realizes that Snake Eyes loved Ophelia like a sister, much like Snake Eyes' twin sister, who had been killed in a car accident, which makes the whole jilting Scarlet thing okay after all, for some reason. Duke reveals various shenanigans about that original mission, that he was working with Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow all along. And then in an action-packed finale, the baddies end up escaping. Finally, Sean Collins graduates as an apprentice master of the Arashikage clan. He chooses his new name, Kamakura, and reveals his new hexagram arm tattoo. Phew.
All right, so it feels like an initial top-down comment from you would be that there is a lot of story in these 4 issues. Do you want to expand on a top-down reaction to this miniseries?
There is definitely a lot that happens in this series, and there's a lot being crammed in. It felt to me like maybe if it was 5 or 6 issues, it would have a little bit more room to breathe. But sort of getting down a bit of a sort of a particular lane there. The thought that I had at a very high level is it looks like this series is there to kind of sort of fill a fairly distinct purpose. So its mission statement is, let's have a story that taking place in between the disbanding of G.I. Joe, which is 1995, and the return in 2001 of the G.I. Joe team in issue 1 of Devil's Due continuity, and serve two purposes: give Kamakura a backstory and an origin, and at the same time you can kind of explain what was that whole thing that happened with Snake Eyes jilting Scarlet, which hasn't previously really been resolved. And yeah, I wondered to what extent kind of Brandon Jerwa, the credited writer, came at this with just a completely blank piece of paper, or just an idea off of his own back. I want to do a mini series, and I want this to be the subject. So it'd be interesting to know what maybe we can next time we speak to him, we can ask this to what degree there was direction of what he should do versus this being the story that he wants to tell, because unconstrained by the rest of continuity, this is kind of its own standalone thing. So it feels like there's probably quite a lot of freedom to tell the story that he wants to tell, but constrained by those elements of continuity that he's kind of has to remain true to, like the state of Storm Shadow during this time. Getting back to that point about it being quite packed, I did find it quite a confusing read. I did find myself going back and rereading panels and sections, trying to figure out exactly what was happening. And it was clearer for me on a second read. I did an initial read and then a kind of reread immediately before this to kind of refresh my memory of it. And the second read, it sort of seemed to hang together a little bit more easily, I think, just because of building up more of a familiarity with the story. I think just helps with, just like with the deck building game or whatever, the first time you're doing it, you're just looking so hard at all of the different mechanics and the complexities that you kind of lose some of that enjoyment of it just flowing more naturally.
Can I respond to that?
Go for it.
Because I think it's totally fair for something to be better or make more sense on a second read or watch. And certainly the G.I. Joe Renegade deck building game was impossible for me to learn when I tried to do it by myself, opening the box, and I needed a second go, watching a video or having someone explain it to me. But I do think you should be able to hand a 4-issue miniseries to anyone, whether they're a G.I. Joe fan or not, and they should be able to follow it. And so I'm not criticizing you for reading it a second time. My dissatisfaction comes from only giving it the one time and not being able to follow everything. By the time I got to the end, I understand everything, but there were several panels and several scenes where I thought, oh, I don't know who I'm looking at in this panel, or, oh, I don't know how this person got from where they were on the previous page or the previous panel to here, or, oh, there are too many characters in this scene and I'm seeing too many of them from behind and they're all sort of in the same color, this dark gray costume. So good for me that I'd be able to figure it out if I read it a second time. But I'm only going to give it, I think a fair shake is just the one time. And so I'm disappointed that there are too many characters, and I agree with you, this really needed to be 5 or 6 issues. And initially I was delighted that it was only 4 issues, because in the 2000s, we're in the era of 6-issue miniseries and 6-issue story arcs, and the publishers had maybe Dark Horse is an exception, and occasionally Boom, but I feel like Marvel and DC had moved away from 4-issue miniseries in favor of 6-issue miniseries, and some of that is about decompressed storytelling, bigger art, more art, fewer word balloons, stretching it out into more issues. And some of that is about having a thicker collection. It's easier to sell a book that's a little thicker on a shelf at a bookstore if it's 6 issues worth than 4 issues worth. And nostalgically, G.I. Joe and Transformers, the miniseries from 86, 87, that's 4 issues. And Marvel was doing a ton of 4-issue miniseries in the 80s. And that was mostly, initially, that was the format. Miniseries were 4 issues. So in terms of how much story is here, there is too much. But also, I was willing to be convinced. I don't love the character of Kamakura, and I don't like the story where Snake Eyes has left Scarlet at the altar. But I was willing to have those made more interesting or explained and sort of bring me over to their side. And this miniseries didn't do that for me.
Yeah, it was an interesting, it's like that thing you talk about, it being slightly overcrowded, and I was just maybe start thinking, could you tell the same or materially the same story without these components? And I was thinking, could you tell the same story without Jinx, Nunchuck, Chabang, Budo, Chuckles even? Could you have told it without Wade Collins?
No, here's an example. At the end, when the helicopter comes to pick up Firefly, there are 2 or 3 other bad guys in the helicopter. Why not 1? Or why not 0? Why not just have an empty helicopter and Firefly makes his own getaway? And, this needed to tie into... There's a mystery set up at the end with who the other bad guys are, which we can get to later in the episode when we're talking about the end of the story. But yes, you make a good point that I think it feels like a rookie G.I. Joe mistake. Oh, it's a team book. Everyone has so many favorite characters. All these characters are so cool. I want to put in a lot of characters.
Yeah, and I get, this is a ninja story, and we've not had any of the, what do they call themselves? The Ninja Squad, Snake Eyes and the other G.I. Joe Neon Ninjas.
Ninja Force?
Ninja Force, thank you.
You mean the toy branding?
Yeah, exactly. So the toy branding of the Ninja Force, which took up a rather large section of the latter run of the Marvel run of G.I. Joe. And so we've not seen them since then. So to have the Green Ninja, Nunchuck, and Chabang, who we know as being from the Marvel books of being the guy with sort of the yellow mask and who had a Oath of Silence. We're doing a bigger ninja story. Wouldn't it be cool to bring back some of those ninjas and sort of have a larger cast and fun fanboy service? And yeah, I get that. It is fun to a degree, but it's more pieces to juggle and makes things what you're sacrificing for that wider cast. You're losing in terms of ability to craft a slightly clearer story. Like page 1, even just the first couple of pages where they're sparring. I had to look back on that about 5 times to figure out what was going on, who was who.
And at least in that scene, there are 4 characters in that scene. There's one guy with black hair and a white uniform. There's someone in a blue mask. There's a redhead female, and then there's Snake Eyes. So you can, even if you can't quite tell sort of the choreography of where they are in the room and sort of who's attacking who, at least there are 4 distinct characters and you can differentiate them. Mm-hmm. Going back to your previous point about Chabang and Nunchuck showing up, I feel like there's a question that gets asked, an unspoken question. Where's Dojo? If you're going to have 2 of the 3 characters, that first year of Ninja Force action figures, there were these 3 new Joes. And, it's not like Huey and Dewey and Louie, and they always have to show up together and like finish each other's sentences. But it does beg the question. Also, if you're going to have 2 of these guys show up, but they're never in costume, is it really them? Like there've been a couple Batman stories over the years in comics where he's dressed up in one of his alter egos, like Matches Malone. He's got, a mask and a wig on, or he takes off the Bat costume because he has to go somewhere and not be recognizable as Batman and also not as Bruce Wayne. He just sort of wears like a hood or like a jacket or something. And if there's some sign that it's still kind of Batman, it's still kind of Batman. But sooner than later, I need to see Batman in his Batman costume. Otherwise, it's not exciting and it's kind of not Batman. And Jinx is never in her costume. Budo's never in his costume. Mm-hmm. And, Budo's costume is silly. Like, it's silly to have a guy running around in full samurai gear in 2005 or 2021, because he showed up in some recent issues of Larry Hama's Real American Hero. But this is the deal with the devil I've made as this kind of G.I. Joe fan. Like, no, I like Budo because he's got this cool costume from that toy from 1988. And if you take him out of that costume and just put him in like CIA SWAT gear or like cool Matrix ninja, like black trench coat, he sort of stops being Budo. And also, he disappears for an issue, and then someone mentions someone named Kyle. And I actually wrote down, who's Kyle? Is Kyle Budo? Am I supposed to know Budo's first name? And a handful of listeners are going to think right now, yes, because some people have memorized all or many of the file card dossiers from the toys. And I've memorized, like 10. It's like the 10 sort of favorite characters from 82, 83, 84, 85. But it's like, no, I need a little more here, because Budo only showed up in the Marvel book like twice and never on the show, and not in the Devil's Due comics before this. And I don't even think, looking back to that scene in issue anyway. So not only too many characters, but also, and I think sort of the rule here is they're not in costume because G.I. Joe's been disbanded. And that does make sense, but still, I need them in something more fun than just wearing what Neo wore in The Matrix.
There's something inherently a little bit silly about G.I. Joe and the costumes they wear, and you sort of just suspend your disbelief on that.
Yes. I've got one word for you. Robin. Like, up until a redesign a couple years ago, like, Robin's costume has always been kind of silly, and we're just, also it's child endangerment. Anyway, sorry, back to you.
Yeah, but we go with it. The costumes are fun, and the big benefit, as you're alluding to, is that it makes them really distinctive, and you can just see very quickly and easily what the character is from their distinct costume. And when you've got an entire cast of characters all wearing very similar dark sneak suits type Snake Eyes cosplay, as we've called it before, it doesn't help with the clarity of just understanding what's going on and who's who.
Yeah,
if you're ping-ponging between fights, between characters, between scenes, as they do in some of the action sequences, you're sort of going from one room to another, between two people fighting in the dark in black costume.
Very particularly in issue 1, Snake Eyes' team, they're all wearing what he wears from the neck down. And then in issues 3 and 4, Budo and Jinx and Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. Storm Shadow's technically wearing white, and the other 3 are technically wearing, I don't think we're supposed to read it as black. We're supposed to read it as a dark gray. But the lighting, so Sunder Raj's coloring, ends up making them all the same. And then on top of that, in issue 4, some sort of surprise characters show up, and some of them wearing masks, and some of them are just guards, miscellaneous guards in this underground vault. And the animated series or the Marvel issues, it's like, oh, that Cobra Soldier, that guy in blue, I definitely know that's not like Chuckles or Snake Eyes. Like, oh, that Cobra Viper, I definitely know that's not Chuckles or Snake Eyes. Okay, I think we've gotten this point. I want to talk for a minute about Stefano Caselli's art. He draws such aggressive, handsome, cool, attitude-y eyes. He draws great eyes and great eyebrows. And I'm going to pick on someone as a comparison, because it's like, well, yeah, what's the deal with these good eyes? Look at all of these, just sort of in the Kamakura or like Storm Shadow sort of visor area, just the eyes, right? As a comparison, in the regular Larry Hama Real American Hero book, I love Shannon Gallant's storytelling, his poses, his acting. I don't love how he draws eyes. They always seem to be a little bit of an afterthought. He draws them, but they always feel like 80% finished to me. And that's his whole run. That's the recent issues at the end of the IDW run that had tougher deadlines. That's the early issues. That's the middle issues with different inkers. Stefano Caselli draws very handsome eyes on men and women, when people are surprised, when they're frowning. And oh man, does Stefano Caselli draw furrowed brows, like every other expression he ever draws in all of comics. That's X-Men Red that I read this morning, and Amazing Spider-Man, and Avengers the Initiative, and G.I. Joe, and G.I. Joe, and G.I. Joe. He draws like when someone's got one eyebrow cocked and one eyebrow furrowed, when someone's got that, you know, like the expression on Storm Shadow from Mike Zeck's cover to issue 45 of G.I. Joe, where Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow have bust through the door, and Storm Shadow looks pissed, right? It's like, that's just sort of every other set of eyes that Caselli draws. And it's so cool. And I want, you know, comics should be an exaggeration. I always think of this comparison that Stan Lee and John Buscema make in the book, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, where Buscema draws a 6-panel scene of like James Jonah Jameson on the phone, and then I think some like a villain crashes through the wall, and he draws it sort of tepidly, and then he draws it again with more dramatic posing, exaggeration, and camera angles. And Stan Lee makes the point that in a Marvel comic, not like those other guys, you know, we exaggerate things. So cool, that's happening here. But it actually ends up being too much, because when Joe's or this Hammer team, when they're getting briefed, when there's like a picnic with the ninjas, when like Stalker's in traffic or Scarlet's in traffic, sort of every panel ends up looking like this photograph of like Poison or Guns N' Roses or Warrant from 1989, where it's like a band photo of a hard rock band, and they're all like attitude, like looking down at you a little bit. And so I love the exaggeration. I actually think Caselli some of the time should ease off. I think there are two things here happening with the lack of clarity in the art. I think he's still pretty new in his comics career here, and he draws anatomy quite well, and his, you know, fight posing, it's good and some of it's great. But G.I. Joe is a hard book to draw because there's so many characters, and B, Brandon Jerwa gives him a lot to do. And I think sort of the some evidence that this is 5 issues or 6 issues worth of story in 4 issues is the panel count. Yeah. There are lots of pages where there are like, okay, I just opened up page 1 and issue 1, and page 2, the second page of the entire miniseries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 panels. Now, that's totally cool, and you can do a bunch of smaller panels during a fight because it's like one fist hitting a face, or one foot missing a shoulder, or like close up on some eyes. But this happens through all 4 issues, and I think Brandon Jerwa gives Stefano Caselli too much to do. Not enough space.
And the other thing that I sort of thought looking at the art is that Stefano Caselli has got a particular physical type that he draws. So beyond like the color of the hair and the sort of distinction of a particular haircut, most of the faces and the body types are very, very similar. You know, sort of very, very muscly, built, stocky, you know, square types, and any one character switch their hairstyle over, they could be another.
Yeah, if I don't look carefully, I agree with you, but there are some, to be fair, there are some notable exceptions. So a couple pages into issue 1, when Hammer team is getting this briefing, there's this 3-star general who looks sort of like an 80-year-old James Jonah Jameson, actually. He has sort of more gaunt cheekbones and a receding hairline and a mustache. And then Caselli does make an attempt to always draw Sean Collins with a narrower face, and certainly the women in this series sort of on the team, and then Jinx, and when we see Scarlet once or twice, they have softer cheeks. But yes, most of the other characters, sort of Duke, the 2 other guys in the Hammer team, have sort of square jaws, and you know, there are lots of artists who sort of have one or two stock faces or like facial types in comics. And that's a common shorthand. So it's sort of not even worth criticizing most comics artists for not really differentiating facial types, right? Like we can't all be like Kevin McGuire. But when there are so many close-ups of head and shoulders, and someone doesn't have something really telltale like a headset radio, it's like, okay, this guy has a headset radio and that guy doesn't. Or like, this guy has a mustache, that guy doesn't. Or this guy is wearing like a very particular bright and colorful GI Joe costume and that guy doesn't. When, as you've said, they all start to be in like sneak suits or fatigues or like Snake Eyes cosplay. Yes, Caselli draws everyone like a very sexy, beefy army rock star. That's actually the name of my GI Joe miniseries, Sexy, Beefy. It's about Chuckles going undercover. There are going to be some Colt Leather jokes. I'm going to finally work Gristle into a story because I'm going to create a backstory for him where he's some kind of musician. I don't know whether Destro's rescued him from... Anyway, back to Master and Apprentice.
What were we talking about?
Faces and body types.
Should we talk about color as well?
Yeah.
Obviously, this the color treatment is quite different to the rest of the books. From Devil's Due up to this point, it sort of feels a lot more painterly, but so there's a lot to like about it in terms of you can see that there's a lot of heavy lifting being done in the colors. My second thought beyond that though is that they're quite muddy and they're quite dark, and that in places makes it a little bit harder going.
Yes. So I agree, and I agree that much of the coloring is muddy. And when I use that word to describe color, I think sometimes people are thinking only browns or grays and blacks, and there actually is a lot of light sources and highlights in Sunder Raj's color in this book. And so I want to add a word to your description, your criticism of muddy. So if you look in issue 3, there's this fight on the rooftop, and there are a lot of light sources because there are all these office buildings around, and all these sort of lights are on in the city at night. So what ends up happening is every little shape, every wrinkle of clothing, every sort of band of hair, every finger gets a highlight and a middle tone and a shadow, and then gradations in between. And so it ends up being quite busy. And so there is a lot of darks, but there are also a lot of lights. And the net effect is too many darks and too many lights. And that's the sort of definition when I sometimes use the prescription over-colored. Sunder Raj has a really nice sense of light, but he overdoes it in almost every scene in this book. And if you give me a second, I actually wrote down a panel that I wanted to point out, which is like my representation of this. And my example of this, right? It's all over the book, the series, but in issue 4, on page 7, and I'm not counting the credits, so art pages. So if you're looking at the issue, it's opposite the Valor versus Venom DVD ad. Panel 4 is Snake Eyes turning back to Kamakura as Kamakura takes his mask off. And the rendering on Kamakura's face and his hand is what I'm talking about. So you have these really nice, pretty highlights on Sean's forehead and on his cheeks and on his nose. And you also have these really bright highlights on his fingers where he's taking his mask off, and on his hair. And you don't see it because it's covered by the word balloons, but not quite highlights, but sort of some higher midtones on his green tunic. And, you know, like the lighting in this scene comes from a candle on his right, our left, and also, I don't know, like a door. Yeah, there's a door that's open across from them. And but the actual sort of painting on Kamakura's face, Sean's face, and his fingers, it's as if there's a light bulb hanging just off panel above him, like those heavy shadows under his eyes, and even the heavy shadows sort of under his like front spikes of hair. So there's too much. The coloring is too busy on sort of every panel and over every surface. And, you know, when I talk about liking old school comics coloring, you know, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s at Marvel and DC, or when I talk about colorists who use a limited palette, like Wes Craig on Deadly Class, or his new Image series, which is called Kaya, Kaya, or Lee Lowridge, who's colored a bunch of stuff for DC and Dark Horse over the years, but I sort of best know him. Oh, and a lot of Vertigo. He colored Gotham Central, the cop book.
Yep.
You know, you look at Gotham Central and like that's meant to agree with the art. The art is pretty flat, and sort of every like pair of pants or every shirt has like just two colors. It's like the color that it is and a little bit of a shading color, or cell shading in any book that's trying to look like animation, or a colorist who, like Dave Stewart, who colors most of the Hellboy books, right? Dave Stewart uses a lot of colors, but sort of never all at once, never all in one scene. And so Master and Apprentice, it's like, okay, it's not inked, so the pencils are subtly dirty or fuzzy, that like slightly affects sort of everything on the page. If you like inked this and erased all the pencils, it would look a little bit sharper, a little bit higher contrast. And then you have this really aggressive like light sourcing sort of on every object and every aspect of every object. And then on top of it, you have crowded scenes and like a lot of furrowed brows, which cast shadows, and, you know, a lot of characters. And so even the coloring is adding to this sort of confusion or busyness. And I can say one more thing about Sunder Raj. tfwiki.net, the Transformers fan wiki, says that he was or is he's an art director at Volta. Volta is an art studio based in Canada that has done a lot of work for Hasbro on Transformers package art in the last few years, some of which was on the actual boxes of Transformers and some of which was on like the trading cards that came with those. So this is not a name that I know from a lot of comics, or maybe any other comics, but he is out there. He has been out there doing other artwork.
So what do you want to talk about next?
I want to talk about story next. Okay, so even if, you know, I don't like Kamakura and I hadn't liked the Devil's Due run, but back in 2005, I considered reading this, and for this episode, I was still excited to read this, right? But, you know, it's still got to all hang together with characters that I believe in, doing things that I believe in and are exciting. And early in the episode, you mentioned sort of so many characters, and there ends up being not just sort of so many characters and too much story, but like one or like a speech and an info dump that took me out of the story. So in issue 3 on page 20, it's the third to last page. So it's when Duke is talking to Snake Eyes and they're standing on that sort of checkerboard floor, and Duke hands Snake Eyes a little camcorder.
Yep.
Okay. So I really don't like this speech. You are one of the best men I've ever known. You are powerful, disciplined, and devoted to your principles. But you're also a coward. And then Duke has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 more word balloons on the rest of the page. And then on the next page, the scene continues, and Duke has another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 word balloons. Jerwa is dealt the hand he's dealt, because way back when in the main book, Blaylock had already had Snake Eyes leave Scarlet at the altar. And we talked about that many episodes ago. And I don't think Snake Eyes would do that. And the previous host, Jay Cordray of Talking Joe, didn't like that either.
We do get the benefit for Jay of there being another panel of Scarlet looking at her ring and crying, which is
Right.
I'm sure he'd enjoy. Anyway, continue.
Okay, so you know, I know like popularly. I know a little about reverse psychology. Like no one gets to go up and call Snake Eyes a coward. Like that just doesn't ring true for me. And so some of this scene, some of this miniseries is reminding me of decisions in writing from previous stories from a different writer that didn't work for me. And so maybe some of this miniseries can't work for me at all. So then, on this page, Duke hands Snake Eyes a camcorder, and I don't actually know what story idea I'm supposed to be getting from this.
Yep.
How long has it been since you left Scarlet at the altar? A couple years at least, right? And so there's an image on this camcorder of Scarlet wearing a dress in a room somewhere with, I don't know, like a fancy doorway or like a fancy painting on the wall or like a fancy curtain. I can't quite tell what the vertical lines are in the background. And then there's someone behind her smiling, wearing a tie. You're looking at 2-month-old film. Do you see what you've left her with?
No.
Is Scarlet at a cocktail party? Is she at like a wine and cheese thing after a military briefing? Is she at it's not a seedy bar. Like I think the idea here is that she's single and she's jilted, so she's looking for a man. She's looking for a date. She's looking for a warm body in the sack, and she's dressed up to go out. But we're in so close, I sort of don't know what the location is. And it's like, is she holding a glass of water? Or is she like fingering her ring finger and there's no ring on it? Is she holding a glass of wine? Is there a different male on the other side of her who's leaning in too close and his eyes are closed and he's like burping? Like, I don't know what this story point is supposed to communicate. And I think Jerwa sort of underwrites it or is like over trusting Caselli's ability to draw something very particular in this scene, or Jerwa isn't giving Caselli enough room to draw it. It needed another panel or something. Oh, and then the third to last page of the entire miniseries. So the last page is a splash. It's like a cool shot of Kamakura, and I don't love it. I think what we really need to see is like the room and not that logo behind them, but okay. And the second to last page, I can't tell where we are. Like we're sort of in a cabin, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 8 people in this scene. The scene gets one page, and we're in, I think, a small cabin up in the high Sierras, and because that's an established location in GI Joe stories, right? Because the caption says 3 weeks later in the high Sierras, and I see a little bit of wood, and Kamakura is coming down the stairs. It's like, where is everyone? What room are they in? It's like, where's the couch? Are they in a dojo? Like, what is this space they're in? But on the previous page, Storm Shadow has this giant speech, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 word balloons across one page. And
Snake Eyes says nothing. Typical.
And I understand if you have 2 people in a scene and one is Snake Eyes, one's going to do all the talking. And like this scene, if you have 3 people in a scene and one of them is Snake Eyes, 1 or 2 of them is going to do all the talking. And I'm not saying I need Snake Eyes to like interrupt and like do a hand gesture or like put his hand on Storm Shadow's shoulder or put his hand on Storm Shadow's wrist and stop him from gesturing. But it's like, oh, this, when I got to this page, this is what I felt like Brandon Jerwa was thinking. Oh, I'm out of room. The story's over in 2 pages. I need to put the chess pieces sort of where they need to line up, because this is after Storm Shadow got brainwashed around issue 150 in the Marvel run, and before Blaylock sort of fixed him around issue whatever it was in the Devil's Due run. But he's been sort of free of this hypnosis in my miniseries in the interim. So I'm going to have him make this giant speech and explain how he feels and how he needs to go back on his own. And I actually like the guts of this speech. I think this bit about, in the second to last panel, adrenaline has been the only thing keeping me in check during all of this, and it fades from me as the minutes pass, right? There are no longer sides to choose. I will heal myself over time, but I must do so alone. Goodbye, my friends. Perhaps we'll meet again in better times. Perhaps we'll meet again in 20 issues of the Devil's Due run, right? Starting from issue 1. And this bit where he sort of looks at Sean, like, so you are the apprentice, Sean, is it? You have my respect and gratitude for following my family legacy. Like, okay, that's good. At the same time, man, I just like turn the page and slam into this wall of 3 people standing there and one of them talking. And so this miniseries feels, it's not disjointed, sort of over-explained and over-choreographed and over-constructed. And then, when Firefly gets away, or Mikhail gets away earlier. Yeah, here's another story moment where I wasn't sure what happened. This is in issue 4. This is just a couple of pages before what I was talking about. So the first panel on this page is 2 people climbing up a ladder. Kamakura is chasing Mikhail out a building, out onto the street. Mikhail draws a gun. He gets hit with 3 throwing stars, and a car screeches around the corner, and Mikhail, holding his head because he's got blood because he took a throwing star to the head, says, that's it, come and get me. And I thought, oh man, this car is about to run him over. And then I thought, oh, maybe this is bad guys and they're gonna like whisk him away. And then I turned the page and he has disappeared. And instead we're behind Sean, and he says, no, you can't. It's like, what? Did Mikhail just get teleported out of there? Like, oh, is he up on the Starship Enterprise in orbit? Like, did he apparate to Hogwarts? Like, he's just gone. It's like, oh, I think we needed a panel where we see Mikhail opening a car door, or the car screeches to a stop and there's a door that's flung open and there's a word balloon pointing inside and we don't know who says it. And they say, get in, or even better, get in, Mikhail, or Mikhail, here. And then at the bottom of this page, there's a woman with black hair who might be the Baroness. I don't know. When you put a woman with a red blouse and a short skirt and high heels and long black hair in a G.I. Joe story, and I can't see her face, I'm going to assume that's the Baroness in like civilian clothes. And she's, I don't know, got a towel or something to Mikhail's head, but I couldn't tell who this was. I thought this was the Nowhere Man or Firefly or Cobra Commander or something. And then I realized the like weird shape of his armor matched, the like chest triangle matched Mikhail from the earlier in the scene. And then on the next page, the Joes are ready for this building to blow up, right? We're still in the final issue. We're like 5 pages from the end, 4 pages from the end. And the building, we see 2 close-ups of a clock ticking, and the building doesn't blow up. And Duke says to Chuckles, nothing. Firefly just played us. All clear, guys. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. That's great. And then the next panel, I don't know what I'm looking at. Kamakura and Snake Eyes are like wrestling? Mark, what are they doing? Like, I'm not saying this to be like mean or silly. I don't know what this panel represents. Is this like a high five? Is he helping him up off the ground? Because I didn't.
He's help. It looks like he's helping him off the ground. But I'm just looking back to try and figure
we didn't
out.
see Snake Eyes on the ground. A page ago, we saw Snake Eyes running, and 4 panels ago, we saw 2 blonde Joes lying on the ground, covering their heads. But since the camera's low, you actually don't see the ground. You just sort of see their heads and shoulders in a pose that suggests they're lying on the ground.
Oh yeah, maybe he had been lying on the ground expecting the bomb to go off. And then
So context, that makes total sense. Visual continuity, unclear and weird. I thought that they were like fighting. I thought Snake Eyes was like throwing a weird punch and Kamakura was blocking it. But then that gets a whole beat. And then the next panel, there's this whole beat for this really well drawn, but like sort of way overdone, like sigh of relief, like anxiety break from Kamakura, where it's like, I guess the building's not going off. Ooh, but he's got his hand on the back of his neck. Like, that's great acting, but like, no, that I needed that real estate for something else in this scene. And I'll just do one more thing, like a continuity thing that I don't understand. and you can help me with it.
You actually just then helped me sort of put something else together that I didn't quite understand in the story. It was because Firefly, he announces something about, oh, listen carefully, it might just saved your life. You're welcome to stay and keep fighting, you know. However, if you're not a big fan of violent explosives, I'd suggest you get out of the building within the next 2 minutes. Best of luck as always. And then that sort of means that it sort of drives all of everyone to sort of get out of the building expecting it to blow up. And then you see the watch. I don't know if we had the time for when it was meant to blow up, but it's like 4 minutes past 12 and it's red, and then it's 4 minutes past 12 and 10 seconds and it's green, and for whatever reason Duke seems to be very confident that there wasn't any bomb because it didn't go off after 10 seconds from an arbitrary time. Anyway, so that confused me. But but I had been thinking, why did Firefly warn them about it to get out of the building? Why wouldn't he just get out himself and let them all blow up? That's more his style. But I guess it's because there wasn't really a bomb, and he just wanted them to kind of be more focused on something that wasn't him. So that kind of story beat makes more sense.
I thought that was cool that he did that. I wondered by the middle and end of issue 4, I was still reading this carefully, but I was reading this a little less carefully than I had been because I had given up on it. And I thought, maybe I'm missing something like what you were just saying, but maybe this is about respect for your enemy. And he was also trained in the ninja clan. So I thought that was cool that he tricked them to get out of the building. So this one last example that I want to bring up, and this is pretty fast, of a storytelling thing I don't understand. This is on the first page of issue 4. We see the outside of a club, we see the inside of a club, and we see a long shot of someone leaning forward in a bathroom in front of a mirror with a towel. And we can tell it's a bathroom because there's a door open and there's like some tile behind them in a mirror. And then in the next panel, we see Wade Collins looking into a mirror, and it's definitely him looking into a mirror because it's a rear 3/4 over the shoulder shot. We are just behind him, looking over his shoulder, past his ear and his cheekbone, and we see the reflection. And he has a full beard. Okay, the previous panel where we're looking from across the room into the bathroom, someone off panel says, "Funny, aren't they?" And then a beat, he's looking in the mirror and he has a beard, and the word balloon says, continuing, the masks we wear. And then all of a sudden, Wade's beard has disappeared and he looks surprised. And then he turns so he can see and we can see who's talking. And it's, I don't know who, it turns out to be Mikhail, who continues, "You're a perfect example, coloring your hair, growing a beard, adding 10 years to your face just to hide the shame." And then in this panel, Wade is looking away from us. Wait, where did his beard go? Was it a costume? Like he put on a fake beard before issue 1 and he just took it off a moment ago between these two panels? Or did he completely shave between these two panels and yet his pose in the two panels is the exact same when he's looking in the mirror? If there is like 15 minutes between these two panels where he's looking in the mirror with a beard and he's not looking in the mirror with a beard, what? Like, where's the razor? Also, like shaving a beard, you need 2 razors. You need like scissors or an electric razor and then like a straight razor, right? You do like the rough and then the fine. Like this was really weird because the speech from Mikhail is about Wade either lying to himself or fooling the rest of the world, which would include his son, right? The masks we wear, coloring your hair, growing a beard, adding 10 years to your face just to hide the shame. And I'd thought when we see Wade in issue 1, it's like, oh, he looks smaller and older and skinnier, and he has like a lot more hair than he did in all the Marvel Hama issues. It's like it's very distinct that he's much older now than his son. But Mark, I honestly don't know what is happening in these two panels. This felt like a Zartan thing where it's like, one moment I'm looking in the mirror and then the next moment I'm someone else because I have a hologram projector or something. So like, what is happening here? Is it a real beard? Did he shave?
You're right. It is weird. And I hadn't thought about it too hard. What I thought was like, one panel is him just before he shaves, and another is the panel after, and then he's sort of surprised seeing his face, under that beard that he's had a little while. But then, as you say, this speech from Mikhail is sort of happening in real time. So I guess you would explain it as him sort of like visualizing himself with the beard just before he had shaved it initially, and then sort of clearing the fog in his brain, and he's sort of seeing himself in the mirror for the first time without the beard.
I feel like sometimes people who make comics are paying too much attention to the movie of the scene, like in their head, where they have the benefit of like sound effects, like the trickling of water, or like music that can sort of build to a little crescendo and then cut out abruptly. It's like for a moment he's in a haze, he's in a daydream, or like did Stefano Caselli and Sunder here need to draw a bunch of like mist on the mirror? And it's like, okay, he has just shaved, but he's still kind of seeing himself with the beard. And then like the mist evaporates, or he like wipes his hand across it. And like what he thought was the reflection of himself from 10 minutes ago is really the reflection of him now. Or like, would the sound of Mikhail talking off panel be like sort of an underwater muffled sound, like swirly and dreamlike? And then when he goes from like, funny, aren't they, the masks we wear, like all of a sudden the like swirly background noise cuts out and Mikhail's speech is like clear and back to normal and like 2 feet away. And then Wade like sort of comes out of it and he like realizes he's been staring at the mirror having shaved. It's like, no, none of that is here. And it might just be that this word balloon is crossing over from one panel to another on the gutter. It might just be an issue of there's not enough negative space to have that word balloon in one panel or the other. And that's a problem with too much story and too much art and too much dialogue, and maybe a letterer who doesn't know where to put word balloons, but maybe a letterer who has no choice but to put a word balloon in over like someone's face or in a confusing place.
I wonder whether maybe originally the idea had been that this was a little bit more literal. He's got his beard, then he's shaved, and then he doesn't have a beard, and he's surprised at the way he looks. And then Mikhail starts talking, after he sees his surprised face. Isn't funny, isn't it? The mask we wear. But there's so much dialogue there that it just didn't fit then in that next panel. And they had to start breaking it up and unintentionally causing confusion.
Good. Or in the first of the 2 panels where Wade's looking in the mirror, if you just had his hand coming into the panel and holding a razor, just indicate that he is starting to shave. And or rather than the like Herb Trimpe squinting Stefano Caselli furrowed brow eyes of this panel where he has the beard and he's looking in the mirror and he's very much paying attention to himself, but looking a little past it. What if you had him look dazed? Like not a furrowed brow, but like straight brows with like zombie eyes, tired eyes, and he's shaving. It's like, oh, he's shaving and he doesn't realize it. And if it seems like I'm spending 5 or 10 minutes on 2 panels on 1 page of 1 issue, yes, I am. It's like, man, comics are hard. And it's like, you see a movie and, it's like the script is great and the music is great and the art direction, cinematography is great and the editing is great and all the actors are great and the fights are great, except one actor's bad. And like every time that actor shows up, those scenes are kind of ruined. It's like, okay, or what happens if you have like great actors, great locations, like dumb story, and also 2 of the actors are bad, right? It's like, no, like there are enough excellent comics out there, and they're not like a ton, but they're enough where like story's great, art's great, storytelling's great, color's great, lettering's great, design's great, that when I read a comic, which is like sort of hamstrung by some of these challenges, it's like, no, I'm going to read it because it's GI Joe and I love it, or I'm going to read it because it's my homework for this podcast. But I read this and it's like, meanwhile, this is not a fair example. This is just some like sort of the most recent, like wonderful comic I was talking about. This was yesterday. A friend of mine said, "Oh man, I really liked that Catwoman Lonely City miniseries, which DC just did. It's 4 issues. It's Black Label. Cliff Chang, who you know from Wonder Woman and Paper Girls, writes, draws, colors, letters, and designs this 4-issue miniseries. And it's like 10 years in the future. Batman is no more, and Catwoman feels guilty and is like come back to Gotham. And there's enough of it that's really familiar. You've seen a lot of these elements before, like, oh, it's Gotham in the future. Gordon's not commissioner anymore. Like one more big score, or like Catwoman has regrets. It's like, okay, I've seen these elements before, but it is so satisfyingly and stylishly done in this arrangement that it feels totally fresh. And like every single panel is well drawn and well composed, and like color is done with a light touch, but like very considered. And like every couple of pages, the palette shifts a little bit. So, you know, like you're underground, you're above ground, it's nighttime, it's daytime. And, you know, and then I get to these like 2 panels of a G.I. Joe comic. It's like, I don't know what this guy is doing with his beard. Is it magic?
It's funny, Tim. I had almost exactly the same, a very, very similar thought where, because I was reading Catwoman Lonely City this week as well.
Oh.
And I was thinking to myself,
because the hardcover just came out 2 weeks ago.
And I was thinking to myself, like, you know, for Talking Joe, you know, we're quite often hard on comics, on the GI Joe comics, and my comparison is because you know we both read an awful lot of comics, and there's so many comics out there, and I sort of pay attention to what's out there, and I try and just select what I know will be very good comics from very good creators that has already people have looked at and heaped praise on. So when I'm getting comics, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be getting a very good comic. So that is normally my comparator. And like, yeah, this week I've been reading Master and Apprentice, which has its flaws, and then Catwoman Lonely City, which has been sort of people's number one comic on a few of the best of the years for 2022. So in some ways it's not completely a fair comparison, because my mental comparator is often against, you know, the very best of comics. There was something that I also wanted to mention about that beard scene while we were on it, which was, I think there's a bit of kind of no prizing or retconning going on in that scene where Mikhail is talking about how Wade has got that beard and he looks very old. And I think a part of that, it might be Brandon sort of seeing the way that Wade looked in issue 1 and thinking to himself, that's not kind of a couple of years of aging, because we're sort of part way between issue 155 and issue 1. That's not even 5 years. And he looks like he's aged 20 years. You know, maybe I should talk to that, because something has happened to Wade and it's not entirely clear what.
Yeah, or I was thinking something similar. Larry Hama has mentioned that at times when he's adding dialogue, when he's writing and adding dialogue after he's gotten the art, because his artists work from his plot, that he has to add some dialogue to explain something that's not clear in the storytelling in the art that he did intend in the plot. And when I saw this word balloon, right, your perfect example, coloring your hair, growing your beard, adding 10 years to your face just to hide the shame, I thought something similar. Is Brandon Jerwa explaining the 2 previous panels, pointing out the beard? So you have a better take on this, a better no prize or explanation for a no prize. But I was on to something similar.
Because yeah, he looks proper old in issue 1. So,
yeah.
So, and I'm sure people sort of in the letter pages probably queried, or or on the message boards queried it. There might have been enough time in between the reaction to issue 1 and this issue coming out.
Having picked on the art and picked on the color, I did want to point out something that I really like, and it's actually on the opposing page of this mirror beard scene. So page 2 of issue 4. I think Stefano Caselli still has a lot of comfort and clarity to work out after this job of moving the camera around in rooms and locations, and not just showing where people are, but like really making me understand where they are and how they're moving. And he's not there yet. He's not like afraid to draw backgrounds, and he's not afraid to draw perspective, right? He's doing that. He's not afraid to draw characters in perspective, and he's not afraid to draw characters in angles, in foreshortening, in perspective, right? Like in poses. Like all this stuff is good and exciting and on its way. The first panel on this opposing page and the third panel are both really nice examples of showing someone past someone. And specifically on that first panel, right, where Firefly's running and Mikhail is behind him, and Firefly says, "Storm Shadow has escaped." This is really nicely done. And this is basic stuff, but it's nicely done that we see Storm Shadow, and the way that Storm Shadow is composed in this panel, we can take it on faith that Firefly doesn't see him. Firefly's aiming away, he's not looking up. And if he is looking up, Storm Shadow is enough to the right that he's sort of blocked by the stairwell. And Storm Shadow's pose reads as tired, worried, relieved, right? Like, gotta get away. And then in the third panel, the one directly under it, it's the reverse angle, right? We see Firefly again, and he's listening to Mikhail. And Firefly's got his hand up, his index finger and his thumb are tense, like he's thinking, he's about to do something. And again, over his shoulder past them in the distance, we see it's again Storm Shadow working his way up those stairs carefully and sort of like he's injured. So there's some nice visual storytelling here, like showing people in relation to each other and that they can't see each other and that we can tell that. But also, since I was so hard on Shunjiraj elsewhere in this podcast, even though there is too much dark to light to dark to light to dark to light on Firefly, right? Like his three fingers sort of become his coat, and it all looks like tubes of dirt or like shiny worms. It's like, it's too much, right? And then on top of that, you have this like very high contrast light and dark in the camo on his mask, right? It's like, no. His camo should not be that contrasty. But Raj does something really great here, which is that red ball in the bottom corner. It's the window where it's a light source past the window outside, and it's hitting that low ceiling, and it's hitting Firefly's left side, what we see on his right, on the side of his head and his cheek and his neck and his coat, and that's really nice. And it even hits the bottom of the stairs that Storm Shadow's on. And so I don't want to say something blanket like Sunder Raj is a terrible colorist or Sunder Raj doesn't know what he's doing. What I want to say is his sense of color and how light behaves, he has a lot of skill. He's just overdoing it in almost every scene.
There was something that I was sort of started thinking about as I was talking about Wade Collins's aging, which is that this is essentially within a sort of 5-year period, and because they are comic book timing is funny. They sort of did try and say that essentially 1995 to 2001 was the gap in between the books, that they sort of aging in real time almost. But yeah, it felt like in terms of Kamakura's career, an awful lot was fit into those short years, because he would have, he got the letter from Snake Eyes in 155, presumably while he was still a kid at home, but considering his future. So he would have had to have gone into some sort of general military training before then, being recruited into Hammer, that's HAMMER team, and then that disaster happening, then the whole apprentice thing happening, then this big conclusion, then stuff happening in between then, and the and issue 1 where he's sort of working with Snake Eyes as Kamakura and doing side jobs for Duke. He's accomplished a lot in those few years.
Yeah, I think I'm fine with that, and certainly a different version of this character Sean Collins in the monthly Larry Hama, A Real American Hero book, has accomplished a lot. He sort of artificially aged up, whereas the other Joes sort of didn't, because now he's one of them. So, it's a cheat or an exaggeration, but I'm okay with it. What threw me off, though, where you're talking about time passing, is just a couple pages into issue 1 of this miniseries. There's this montage of training with this redhead and Scarlet looking grumpy about it. And then a narration box that says 1 year later. And I thought, whoa, that's 8 pages into this comic, into this miniseries, and it just jumps a year. And this is before the reveal that Snake Eyes feels something for his apprentice because she reminds him of his sister. And I don't buy that. I'm sorry. I just don't think it's good. Either as a red herring that it's like, oh, he's like losing his love for Scarlet because there's this other redhead and she's younger, or like she's more of a ninja, or just because it actually reminds him of his sister. Like, no.
Yeah, it's meant to be introduced as a bit of a red herring, I guess, that you meant to come to the conclusion that possibly there's some feelings from Snake Eyes towards that other redhead. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm putting on my Jay Cordray hat here. No, I don't buy any of this scene in the first pages where Snake Eyes is training these new people and ignoring his girlfriend wife. He would be training with her. It's like, sorry, Blaylock and Jerwa, you just got it wrong. And Jerwa has to make it work. So I appreciate the attempt to incorporate an important thing from the Larry Hama story, connection to his sister, the very specific photo of his sister that he carried in Vietnam. I appreciate the attempt. It still doesn't work. I did want to ask you, Mark, about page 8 of the first issue. So Sean's talking with his dad, Wade, and in the third panel, Wade, the elder, looking at a photo from Vietnam, says, "Have you been in touch with Snake Eyes?" And Sean, the younger, says, "Not since we exchanged letters." And I thought for a second, okay, this is referring to issue 155, which is an amazing comic book. And remind me, in issue 155, Snake Eyes gets a letter from Sean. And most of the issue is Snake Eyes writing a response. And then on the final page, Sean's talking to his mom. And is it that he sent a response to Snake Eyes' response and that's what got returned?
So as it goes, Snake Eyes receives a letter from Sean, which is written in a typeface, which I find quite difficult to read on the fly. At that point, he is in school. He's looking at recruitment posters and asking Snake Eyes for advice, I guess. Snake Eyes replies. Sean gets the reply. And Wade, a much younger Wade than appears here, says, "If you're still intent on joining up even after reading that letter, I'll sign the pages. I have to think about this some more, Dad." So he's not convinced that he's going to sign up at that point. And the conclusion is that there isn't a return address. That's because it is shuttered.
Okay. So maybe I'm just parsing the definition of the word exchanged. I guess if you send me a letter and I send you a letter, we've exchanged letters. Okay. So I'm nitpicking. I thought when I read this scene in Master and Apprentice that it was slightly characterizing, that an exchange would be more than one letter each way. But okay.
And also, at some point it says in this book, which I found a bit weird, was it said that Sean was Snake Eyes' godson. Yeah,
that is new.
When did that happen? if they only
I think it happened a moment ago when you just said that out loud. Yeah, I think that's a good example of an interesting idea that also gets put into this. You know, I mean, it makes sense. You know, his dad and the other guy were in Vietnam together, and they exchanged some letters in 155.
Yeah, and I guess him becoming his godfather, maybe it's not kind of a literal "I was there at your christening" thing. It could be, you know, more of sort of a, you know, uncle. Or
it is a
whatever.
thing you ask someone, will you be my son's godfather? And it's like, if I die, will you raise him or help out? And I don't need a whole scene, but yes, I do think for that reference here to be a surprise to us, it should have been brought up once before, either in this miniseries, in Devil's Due, or referring to something back in Marvel. And since it doesn't, it does jump out as a surprise. And not a like, oh, how novel, Jerwa's doing something clever. Sort of like what you said, like, wait, when did that happen?
Yeah. And how does that fit in with the rest of the things, like them being in that helicopter together and not speaking to one another, sort of barely acknowledging each other, you know, that kind of thing. It's like, anyway, but you know, he there is enough of a relationship there that Sean turns up on his doorstep and is taken in as the apprentice and all the rest of it. So,
oh, you know what I just realized? This page I'm talking about in issue 1, where Sean's hanging up a coat and then Wade is looking at the photo and he refers to the letters. I didn't know what was happening in the 4th panel. Why is Sean like coming down the stairs and there's this giant like painting leaning against the banister? And now I realize that thing on the bottom, it's below the "he's a good man" word balloon. That's the photo. The framed photo is in the foreground. So in this panel, we are looking from Wade's point of view.
Yeah.
Back at Sean, but it really wants like a thicker line outlining the frame to separate it from the guy behind it. And also we need to see that hand and that thumb again.
Yeah. When you pointed out, I was a bit like, what is what? But never mind. What else did I want to mention? I sort of said, could you have the same story almost without Wade being in it, or without that twist that Wade joins Mikhail and is then killed because of space? That has to sort of all happen very quickly without a huge amount to breathe. And in issue 4, Wade dies, and then Kamakura has his becoming the master, or, you know, graduating element, and his somewhat celebratory last page of him in his new uniform smirking sort of made me think, oh, and your dad just died a few pages earlier. I thought possibly that death of Wade wasn't needed, or if it was there, needed a little bit more space.
Yeah.
We're talking about the death of Wade again. It feels like deja vu.
Right, because in our regular episodes, not about Disavowed, where we talk about the IDW GI Joe, I was predicting that
he caught a bad one.
Caught a bad one. I was predicting that Wade Collins would definitely die on Cobra Island outside the casino, and he didn't. Okay, so yes, Sean looks pretty happy and cool for having just lost his dad. It is 3 weeks later, but here's a rewrite for this final 2-page scene at the end of this miniseries, right? 3 weeks later in the High Sierras. I guess this is it then. And then Jinx says, Sean Collins, you stand before your peers and your fellow Rashikaje ninja as a warrior among men. Your training is complete. The final trial has come and gone. And they walk outside, and there's a little like tombstone for Wade Collins outside this cabin, which Stefano Caselli does not draw. Like, we don't see an exterior, and like, I don't need an establishing shot with like a little cabin on a mountain with trees around it and snow and smoke coming out of the chimney. But it's like, okay, we've got this guy who was in the US military, but then he became Cobra, and then he pointed a gun at some Joes at the wall in DC, and then he kind of became a Joe, and then his son became a Joe, sort of, but a ninja. It's like, no, this guy would definitely get buried off the books. So why not have them bury him in this scene or just before this scene? And rather than spending a full page with a really cool pinup that's going to like sell for more money at a convention for the artist, where... And
can be used as the reaping cover.
Yeah, where instead of a full page of art on the final page of the comic, why not break it into 4 or 5 or 6 panels and have them go outside and he like says something nice about his dad, or he looks at the like pile of dirt where they just buried his dad and he like shows the tattoo.
Oh, and we saw the wrap up of this issue 4 sort of is the segue into GI Joe issue 1, where we sort of see Kamakura for the first time on a mission for Duke, from the base of Snake Eyes' cabin, where he's been snooping on the dreadnoughts. So it is a decent segue to kind of set up how it is that Kamakura and sort of Snake Eyes are on the side working on these little missions for Duke in before the Joe team has been reactivated.
I have a response to that. So a few minutes ago, we were both making an arbitrary and therefore unfair comparison of this to a recent Prestige DC Catwoman miniseries, and it would be more fair to compare this to other Brandon Jerwa stories or other G.I. Joe stories. You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of The Mission That Never Was. This reminds me of a G.I. Joe story that doesn't feel like a G.I. Joe story, where the pacing and the sort of movement of characters from point A to point B to point C feels... the word forced is too strong, but every time I've read that story, like the 3 times I've read that story, when it first came out a couple years ago, and then for this podcast, I remember thinking, man, this is like the one Larry Hama G.I. Joe story, which just like, it doesn't work. It doesn't flow. And I know that's because, and he has said so, that's because Devil's Due made him write to an outline. He had to say what was going to happen in all the issues before he did it. And Hama is much better at open-ended stories. But, a publisher and the comic book store business culture doesn't want a publisher to say, here's a Larry Hama G.I. Joe miniseries. It's going to be 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 issues. And what I see here is Mission That Never Was isn't like full of 37 characters. It's not like too packed in that way. But I do see Hama sort of inelegantly moving from place to place because he has to hit he has to hit these marks. And I see this sort of list of things that Jerwa either has decided for himself that he wants to hit to make this connect from 155 to Devil's Due 1, or that Blaylock is saying, touch on this, touch on this, touch on this. And then on top of it, Jerwa puts in too many characters and a lot of dialogue. And then you have this artist who's good, but not great yet at storytelling. And so the whole thing feels uneven. It's like I read a scene and I think, okay, I can't quite follow this, but the action's exciting. And then someone talks for a page. It's like, oh. So both are 4-issue stories. Both are artists who I was excited to be working on G.I. Joe, Dan Jurgens on the Frontline arc. Both are artists who ultimately don't pull off the work I want them to. Dan Jurgens because I don't think his heart was in it, or maybe the deadline was terrible. And Caselli here because he's not up to the challenge yet. And both are G.I. Joe stories that I would consider reading again and have like sort of a soft spot for. It's like, what's that G.I. Joe story that Hama did that like, it was the sequel to 155. It got us to Devil's Due. It's like, that should be cool. It's like, oh, well, this is the Devil's Due story that gets us to Devil's Due. It's like, nope, I don't like either.
Changing tack incredibly. I wonder if you picked up on this plot point, Tim. Mikhail Derenko. What's his connection to the wider G.I. Joe story that Brandon Jerwa was telling?
Does he become a Red Shadow?
He becomes Overlord.
Oh, that's cool.
So Kamakura slinging his throwing stars at Derenko and one catching him in the eye explains Overlord's, I don't know if it's missing eye or just a scar on his eye.
That's neat. It's not entirely clear on the page that I've already talked about, where Kamakura throws 3 throwing stars and they hit Mikhail. it's not entirely clear that one of them hits him in the eye. The silhouette only shows that one hits him somewhere on the head. But yes, that Jerwa is even making that connection. That's really fun. It is both a representation of the care that Jerwa is putting into the connective tissue of his stories, and also the risk you run by putting so much connective tissue into your stories.
And the bit sort of, knowing that Mikhail Derenko is Overlord, and knowing that he then joins Serpentor / the Coil, and sort of working with the jugglers, I wonder if that is meant to be the kind of the underlying hint as to the wider organization that he's working for, that it's the Nowhere Man structure is that he is working for the Coil. And the Coil, they talked about him recruiting ex-Cobras, and the Coil consists largely of disenfranchised ex-Cobras. So I suspect that's probably what that is meant to be.
That's a cool attempt, and for the Devil's Due fans who were really invested in the Devil's Due story at the time, that's thrilling. Do we know who the Nowhere Man is? Do we see him in this story? Is he on that helicopter on the rooftop fight, or is he just mentioned?
I think Nowhere Man is meant to be a code name for Mikhail Derenko. That's the reveal. That he is the Nowhere Man.
Okay.
But yeah, Derenko is set up almost as like the nemesis for Kamakura, and that story doesn't get resolved in the main book because he's sort of blown up in the Arctic somewhere. Do you remember where he attacks their base?
I remember now that you have said so.
So that's where we see the end of Derenko, I think, and maybe there was a plan that he might sort of serve some larger purpose here that wasn't able to be fulfilled in the wrap up of the story. But there we go. That Derenko versus Kamakura reunion fight never came to pass.
A small thing that would have helped me in this miniseries would be if Mikhail Derenko had either one costume through all 4 issues, or if he had something like an eye patch, or like a goatee, or an earring, or like...
If only he had that. If only he had that scar earlier on in his career.
If only in the Hammer team briefing at the Pentagon in issue 1, he had a throwing star sticking out of his head. Because in the beginning, in issue 1, he's in military. Yeah, in issue 1, he's wearing fatigues. In issue 3, he's wearing a jacket and tie. In issue 4, he's got this armor. And I see an attempt to make him different from the other people. He's got black hair, it's slicked back. In issue 3 and 4, it's always got sort of 2 strands sort of coming off it.
Yeah, though in his earlier appearances, he's got more of a military sort of spiky look to him.
Yeah,
so it's
and so
not. Again, it's not helping us. It's because it's not consistent. I mean, you can change your hairstyle over time, particularly if you're building a new identity of yourself, but it doesn't help. It doesn't help us poor readers to be able to track one issue to issue.
There are good reasons in real world logic to have people change clothes and change hairstyles and makeup, and there are, it's like, no, I always know I'm looking at Charlie Brown, front, back, day or night. And in this story, 75% of the time when I'm looking at Firefly, I know it's Firefly because he's wearing that mask. And the 25% of the time that I don't, it's because we see him from the back, and it's that thing where everyone else is wearing dark gray in the scene, and I can't tell who anyone is.
And that there is a moment where he's having that meeting, I think, Firefly and Derenko, and Firefly doesn't have the mask, and you're a bit like,
oh, right. And I thought
is that
right. And I thought, wait, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel, because I think the only time we've ever seen Firefly without his mask is in 126 or 129. Yeah,
and he's got a blurry face, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's like using some hypnosis so they sort of can't see who he is. It's like, no. you guys are misreading this. We're not supposed to see Firefly.
Yeah.
Like, always have him in his mask. Put him in a jacket and tie with his mask. Or I guess put him in like a jacket and tie, but like have his face shadowed and like have him holding that phone from his action figure and wearing like his gloves and have someone call him Firefly. Make it really obvious it's Firefly. Like which sort of reminds me of, maybe this is my final comments on this miniseries. And this goes back to Devil's Due, even the first arc. I think Snake Eyes loses some of his power when his face is healed and or when he is not wearing his mask. And it's in issue 4 of this miniseries of Master and Apprentice. No, it's in issue 3. So there's a scene halfway through the issue where it's after the mission on the rooftop went bad. And it's a scene where Snake Eyes wakes up in bed. He's got a bandage on his arm. He walks into a living room and he sees Chuckles, any guy with black hair and a red shirt, Jinx, and Sean sitting on furniture, and Duke is standing there. And Duke says, "Hello, Snake Eyes." Okay. And in that first panel when Snake Eyes wakes up, he's making a face. He's making a face like you make when you wake up and you sigh and you're like, your head hurts. And then in the second panel, he's a little inscrutable because his face is a little bit in shadow. And then in the third panel, he's far away. So I don't quite know what he's supposed to be feeling. And then in the next panel where they shake hands, Duke says, "Chuckles and I owe you an apology, I think." And Caselli crops Snake Eyes' head out of the shot, which is ordinarily what I would want, but is really weird here because he's just shown Snake Eyes' head 3 panels in a row. So no, you're allowed to see this version of Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes, there's so many layers to this, right? Like, he wears a mask because he's injured. He wears a mask because maybe he's ashamed. He wears a mask because it makes people uncomfortable if they see his face. In G.I. Joe stories, he takes his mask off to freak people out. When he takes his mask off in front of Scarlet and a doctor in issue 93, it's a big deal. It's like a very, very small or a big gut punch for the reader, depending on your expectations. And like, what happens in 95? The minute he gets plastic surgery, he takes hot ash to the face. And, we talked about, you and I and Jay Cordray, previous host of Talking Joe, when, is it at the end of Reinstated? Is it Devil's Due issue 4? Is that when Snake Eyes proposes to Scarlet?
I think you're right. Yeah, I think so.
And he's got this like very short haircut, and he just sort of looks like Duke, but not with like Duke's modern, like very, very thick buzz cut, like his like Lieutenant Guile, like his miniature Lieutenant Guile. Snake Eyes just sort of looks like anyone when he's not wearing his mask. He looks like Chuckles. He looks like Downtown. He looks like Psych Out. And when you put his mask on, you don't know what he's thinking. And that adds a lot of drama to any panel of Snake Eyes doing anything. Standing there, shaking hands, gearing up, like jumping off a roof. And so you project. And it's not that he can't communicate, because he can write notes. Like, doesn't he write a note? He writes observations in, is it issue 4?
Yeah, when he's...
Marvel issue 4, Operation Wingfield. And then otherwise, he doesn't talk. He doesn't write except for 155, right? And like 155 has a lot of power because like every 5 issues, Snake Eyes hadn't been writing notes and like doing sign language or like texting. And so every time you have him on panel and he's not wearing his mask, it's like, it's not that I need him to be scarred if I see him without his mask, because that like keeps the character damaged. It's that it makes him less interesting and less special. And so that he keeps showing up in all these scenes in these miniseries and here and there in the main Devil's Due series without his mask. And he's like, sometimes he's smiling a little bit or he's not. It just feels like the wrong note to me.
Yep.
It's like, okay, this is a Snake Eyes. This isn't my Snake Eyes. And it's sort of not Snake Eyes. And it's like, the scene in issue 1 that I was talking about where that montage where he's training the kid who looks like his sister, and Scarlett's on the phone and she's worried or grumpy about it. It's like, no, if we can see his expression, then we like start to, it's like, no, those expressions carry too much weight. It's like, is he smiling? Is he just, it's like, no, just put the mask on. Like if he and his apprentice are like meditating in the garden and she's on the phone, Scarlett, and she can see them, and Snake Eyes is holding a sword upright and he's like frowning or smiling. It's like, that's too much. It's giving me too much information. I want to always be sort of uncertain and guessing with Snake Eyes. And that's a decision that Devils Do made early on that I think takes the character in a direction that I will never be on board with. Like, he's much more interesting on the covers of Master's Apprentice than he is in the book. And by interesting, I mean, like cool and mysterious and what's the word that I use? Inscrutable. Yeah. Like, no, Snake Eyes is inscrutable, right? It's not that he can't talk. It's that he doesn't. So in addition to him not writing notes and telling people how he feels and telling the audience how he feels, we also, by that logic, by that rule, we shouldn't see from his face how he feels. Or there's just a little bit of body language, like in some Marvel issue where he's in costume and Scarlett's in costume and he like turns away from her. Or like he's wearing his mask, his like Caucasian mask with the sunglasses, and they're on the ferry together, right? And it's like, no, it's context clues. It's that he's standing next to her and her arm is around him and they're on the freaking ferry together. It's not that he's like, like leaning his head on her shoulder. Nope, too much. It's not that he's like got these like gorgeous eyes and eyebrows and pouty lips in a Stefano Caselli Master and Apprentice panel. And he's like smiling at her like, nope, too much. It's like Snake Eyes is action, not words and not face.
I had a sort of an observation on the look of Kamakura as I was reading this, which is probably completely meaningless, but I thought I'd share it out there with the world. Kamakura is got a sort of fairly bright green bodysuit with a black mask. Who else has got that as their outfit from GI Joe? It's Firefly version 2. Is that a coincidence, or do you think that's Josh Blaylock in designing Kamakura trying to create a relationship? I think that is a coincidence, to be honest. Maybe some subliminal coincidence, but I don't think there's nothing to read into it any more than that. But imagine as a sequel, Kamakura in his black and green versus Firefly in his black and green. Like all these guys in dark gray in issue 3. But you know what they say, black and green should never be seen. Never mind. I think there are some really interesting color relationships in GI Joe in 1982. Good guys are in green, bad guys are in blue. Or Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, they're opposites. Or Snake Eyes and Scarlet. You can see who she is and she has color. Snake Eyes, you can't. He's all covered and he's in black. And sometimes it's like you can put Stretcher next to the Alley Viper. It's like, this guy's got a hat. and a flight pod stretcher thing, and that guy's got a shield and blue camo. It's like those are just some colors. So yes, Kamakura does look like Firefly version 2, and I agree, it's just a coincidence. I think we're pretty much done with our discussion. Was there anything else that you wanted to point out? Did you have any errors? Favorite line of dialogues? No, I think that bit I just did about Snake Eyes and being inscrutable and seeing him and not seeing him and how he communicates is so good. I feel like it's like, oh shoot, that's at the end of a long episode. Are people going to get to that? It's like, oh, do people pay more attention to the Hama IDW episodes of Talking Joe than Disavowed? Like, oh, Mark should cut that and paste that into the middle of an IDW episode, or like release it as its own, like, it's like, Mark, you should go record 10 minutes on how you think about Snake Eyes and release that as a mini episode and say to people, like, okay, if you don't listen to Devils Do episodes or you don't get to the end, this is good stuff. Tim got onto something here. Very good. No, I'm done talking about this mini series for this episode. Okay, so do you want to score it? Should we do a yo-joage? 4. Okay.
maybe a 3. Like a 3 is so damning because a 3 is almost not a functioning comic, and there's 4. But man, issue 3, I in my notes I wrote several times for issue 3 and for issue 4, what is happening in this panel? Or I can't follow page 12, or I can't follow page 13, or what is happening on page 15, panel 6? That's issue 4. That's issue 4.
I think my score probably would have been a 5, but then on my reread, I felt like that added a lot to it, and it sort of it made me more comfortable with the book. So I'll probably go 6, 6.5, something like that.
Wow.
So I, it's not scoring up there in the 7s, 8s, 9s, but I appreciate that there was some effort made to into this book, even if it wasn't entirely successful across the board. And it's interesting seeing a young artist like Stefano Caselli, who's sort of on the cusp, doing some sterling work, but not at all times quite achieving it. So and as always, anything above a 5, not a regretful read, and something that I would be happy to reread at some point in the future. So there we go.
And I do take that into account when I give this a 4. Reading this again would make me sad. Now that said, I really enjoyed our interview with Brandon Jerwa, and I would love to chat with him again, and I would love to have lunch with him or bump into him at a convention. So this isn't like, Brandon Jerwa's a bad guy. It's not that.
Okay, so we are done with Master and Apprentice. Next time on Talking Joe Disavowed, we will continue our look at the tail end of the Brandon Jerwa era. And I think we'll do that with Master and Apprentice Volume 2, if you can bear it, Tim.
Let's do G.I. Joe Transformers 2 first. No,
That's
because...
a way of saying that you can't bear it.
No, it's because that's chronological. Because that is advertised in Master and Apprentice Volume 1, Issue 3.
Okay. You want to do Transformers, G.I. Joe versus Transformers Volume 2, written by Dan Jolly, as our next thing?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Do that.
Yes,
then.
I do.
So your homework, ladies and gentlemen, before the next podcast is to dig out Volume 2, and we'll be discussing it next time.
And that's 6 issues, and we're going to do all 6 in one episode?
Yes.
Okay.
And in between discussing the Devil's Due era, we'll be doing other things as well. Find out what those are at the same time that we do, I think. But we'll be talking to some interesting people over the next few months, I am sure, while we wait for issue 301. So where can people find you, Tim, when we're not talking on this podcast?
Video essays about television and film at atomicabe.com, or our YouTube page, Atomic Abe Productions. My brick and mortar comic book store, Hub Comics, is in Somerville, Massachusetts, and I write about G.I. Joe at arealamericanbook.com.
Very good. You can find out more about the show at the usual places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website that has links to all those places. If you're not on the Facebook group, subscribe to us on Twitter and Instagram, and definitely subscribing to us on YouTube, then please get on and do that. You can also support the show via Patreon, patreon.com/talkingjoe, with as much or as little as you want to contribute to us. And a big thanks to all of our backers, Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, and Brian, who are all getting early access to episodes, as well as some exclusive content. And that is us done. But remember that...
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast!
Laters.